Okay. I genuinely think The Last of Us just delivered one of the most emotionally brutal finales on television right now. And honestly, Convergence doesn't even feel like a normal season finale anymore. It feels like the moment this entire story crosses a line it can never come back from. Because by the end of this episode, nobody feels like the hero anymore. And that is what makes this finale terrifying. Now, right from the opening scene, the atmosphere already feels wrong. The show immediately throws you into this heavy emotional tension where you know something terrible is about to happen. There's no happy energy here, no feeling of hope, just silence, anxiety, and characters who are mentally falling apart. And honestly, Bella Ramsey absolutely carries this episode because Ellie doesn't even feel like the same person anymore. She's exhausted, angry, emotionally numb, and completely consumed by revenge. What makes this so painful to watch is that the show knows Ellie is going too far, and it still forces you to understand why she feels this way. That's why The Last of Us works better than most modern dramas. It doesn't create simple heroes and villains. Everybody feels broken, everybody feels damaged, and every choice feels ugly. And honestly, this finale might be the darkest Ellie has ever been in the entire series, because throughout the season, we've slowly watched revenge destroy her mentally. Every episode pushes her further into violence, further into obsession, and by the time Convergence begins, she barely even reacts to death anymore. That emotional numbness is honestly scarier than the infected. And speaking of infected, bro, that subway sequence was horrifying. The sound design alone deserves an award. You hear every scream, every distant movement, every clicker sound echoing through the tunnels. And the craziest part? The show barely even shows the infected sometimes. It understands something most horror series completely forget. What you don't see is usually scarier. There's one moment where Ellie slowly realizes something is moving in the darkness behind her. And the camera doesn't rush the scene. It just lets the tension build naturally, and honestly, I was stressed the entire time. But what makes this episode truly special isn't just horror or action, it's emotion. Because underneath all the violence, this finale is really about grief. About what happens when somebody becomes so obsessed with revenge that they slowly destroy themselves. And Ellie knows that's happening. That's the painful part. There are multiple scenes where you can literally see her questioning herself emotionally, but she keeps moving forward anyway because she doesn't know how to stop anymore. And that emotional conflict makes every conversation in this episode feel dangerous, especially that confrontation scene. Bro, the tension there was unbelievable. No giant action, no dramatic superhero music, just raw hatred sitting between two broken people. And honestly, that silence made the scene even more uncomfortable because The Last of Us understands that emotional violence can feel more intense than physical violence. And visually, this might genuinely be one of the best-looking episodes HBO has ever produced. The ruined city environments look incredible. The abandoned streets, the rain effects, the destroyed buildings covered in vegetation. Every frame feels cinematic. There are shots in this episode that honestly look like something from a high-budget apocalypse movie. And HBO continues proving why this is still one of the greatest video game adaptations ever made. Because the world actually feels real, dirty, empty, dangerous. You constantly feel like death could happen at any moment. And honestly, that atmosphere is what separates this show from generic zombie series because The Last of Us isn't really about zombies. The infected are just background horror. The real horror is emotional trauma, loss, guilt, violence, and how people slowly lose themselves trying to survive. And this finale proves that perfectly. Now let's talk about the performances for a second because everybody absolutely delivered here. Bella Ramsey was incredible. The emotional breakdown scenes felt painfully real. The anger felt real. The fear felt real. And there's this terrifying moment where Ellie almost seems emotionally empty while surrounded by violence. And honestly, that scene disturbed me more than any infected attack because you suddenly realize revenge has changed her completely. And then we finally get to that ending. Bro, I genuinely sat there staring at the screen after the episode ended because this finale refuses to comfort the audience. It doesn't try making things feel okay again. Instead, it leaves you emotionally exhausted. That final confrontation feels less like a victory and more like two broken people destroying whatever humanity they still had left. And the final shot, absolutely devastating. The silence, the empty atmosphere, the emotional numbness afterward. It perfectly captures what this season is really about. Cycles of violence, and how revenge destroys literally everybody involved. Nobody wins, nobody heals, everybody suffers, and honestly, that message is probably why The Last of Us became such a massive worldwide phenomenon. Because underneath the apocalypse and infected, this story feels human, painfully human, and that emotional realism makes everything hit harder. Even the small moments feel important. Even quiet conversations feel tense. You constantly feel like something horrible is about to happen. And by the end of Convergence, you realize the emotional damage might be permanent. So overall, I genuinely think this was one of the strongest finales HBO has released in years. The cinematography was incredible, the acting was phenomenal, the horror sequences were terrifying, and emotionally, this episode completely wrecks you. I'd honestly give Convergence a 9.5 out of 10. Not because it was fun, but because it fully commits to emotional realism. It wants violence to feel ugly, it wants revenge to feel destructive, and it wants viewers to understand that survival doesn't automatically make somebody a good person. And honestly, that's exactly why The Last of Us feels different from almost every other show on television right now. Because most series treat violence like entertainment. The Last of Us treats violence like trauma, and by the end of this finale, you completely understand why. Because sometimes surviving the apocalypse isn't the hardest part. Living with yourself afterward, that's the real horror.